Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Now in this video, I am going to be explaining the difference and in my opinion, whether you should go for a tight range or a wide range on your liquidity positions and what the difference is and what they mean and how to determine this and all of that good stuff. So before we get into it, if you could please hit the like button, subscribe if you are new, and let's jump straight into the video. So for the sake of this video, let's go ahead and use a pool such as WETH to USDC on Aerodrome. So how you determine whether this is going to be good for a tight range or a sort of wide range is really depending on what the market's doing. And in my opinion, I always like to go wide. Minimum of around 10% is ideal for me, 5% on each side. However, that does determine your APR and it also determines where you're putting that liquidity, right? So if we just do, okay, I just pulled this up on VFAT and it just suggested a 2% range for 150% APR. Sounds great, right? However, we're only providing liquidity between $3,140 on Ethereum and $3,203 Ethereum. That is an extremely tight range and that will probably go out of range within the next sort of 20-30 minutes. You know, depending on the price, it could stay in this range for a while, but you know, high likelihood is because it's so tight and you're only providing liquidity over what $100 range, you're going to go out of range very quickly. So you're not going to be printing those fees and you're going to have some impermanent loss there pretty quickly with entering the pool. So what I like to do is I like to go wide. Now keep an eye on this APR here. So as we go ahead and pull out our position, okay, let's say if we go to 5% either side for a 10% range, you can see the APR drops to 30%. And why is that? Well, you see these little spikes here, okay, these 10 spikes. Well, that is where your sort of liquidity is going. So if you, let's say for easy math's sake, you have $2,000 that you want to test out as a test run on these positions. Well, if you're going to go for a 10% range, each one of these wicks, okay, is going to be your money. So let's say you have, again, $2,000, you've got $200 on each one of these, which, so you're just spreading your money pretty thin, right, on each sort of section, each percentage point. That is why the APR drops, because you don't have as much money in these versus if you were to go really tight, okay, like a 2% range, you've got $1,000 on each one now. Okay, so essentially the wider range you go, the wider you're providing the liquidity, so it has to stretch further. So therefore you don't have as much in each bucket, if that makes sense. That's why the APR drops, and that is why you won't make as much on a wider range. However, the reason I would not like to go super tight like this is because you're going to come out of range very quickly. It's not going to be very stable. You're always going to be rebalancing, potentially looking at some impermanent loss pretty quickly. So I like to go for a wider range, anywhere from, depending on what the market's doing, but I would say 10% is ideal, potentially even wider. So of course, 30% is, you know, I like to do anything above a 30% APY. So this would be okay, in my opinion, but you know, you can actually find positions. Okay, this is the deepest liquidity over on base with WETH and USDC. However, if we were to pick a position that has a smaller amount of TVL, let's say WETH and USDC over on PancakeSwap, this is a pool that I'm in, okay, and I were to do the same thing, -5 and +5, the APRs are very similar. However, you will notice that because there isn't as much TVL, there isn't as much liquidity, you will probably generate a higher sort of LP reward. Okay, same thing with this position here, Hydrex on base. You can see that this is defaulted a 30% range and you're generating a lot higher APR at 100% almost. Now, if I were to do my minimum of 5% here, you can see that we're, okay, 5.6 and 5.6. No, it must be a multiple of 0.6. Okay, that's fine. But anyway, just for example's sake, you can see that we'd be generating a 200% APR. But the reason this is for is because there isn't as much liquidity, so there isn't as much reward. There's not, the rewards that are being generated aren't shared with as many people because there isn't as much liquidity in here. But also the weekly rewards are lower, and this is just right now. Do people trade on Hydrex very often? Is there DAP risk, etc.? So you kind of have to weigh up a lot of different options when you're looking at going into lower liquidity positions. This would potentially fit my criteria because I do like to go in anything above $1 million, but I like to stick with the sort of the big boys in terms of DApps and sort of DEXs, just because there is that risk. So do keep that in mind. So yeah, that is the difference between going tight and wide. Obviously, the wider you go, yes, your LP overall, the APR will probably be lower long term than going super tight, of course. But you're not going to have to be managing it as often. You're not going to be sort of stressing that, you wake up in the middle of the night thinking that your 3% range has gone out and you're checking it every 30 minutes to make sure you're printing fees. It could be one strategy to go ahead for, but I would not like to do that. Sort of smaller ranges, but more sustainable is better for me. If I go into here, you can see I'm currently getting an APR of 50% on my 5K, which is currently generating around $7 a day. Nothing too insane, but this is pretty decent ranges. I have a 11.88% range on my USDC and Bitcoin. I've got a 10% range on my WETH and USDC, and 10% range as well on this tiny position. So this for me is great. I like these sort of more wide ranges just because I don't have to manage it as often. I opened this position around a day ago, and you can see, look, like I just mentioned, sometimes your APR is going to jump up massively depending on trading. So you can see again, this Weetham USDC pool that I was just showing you is this one here, and it's just massively jumped up. So your APR can fluctuate a ton depending on trading volume. So yeah, that's the difference. I like to go wide. I like to go at least 10% is sort of ideal. And depending on the position, of course, sometimes I will go tighter. Let's say if it's an Ethereum to WETH, right? It's the exact same token. One of them's a sort of depository token, a wrap token or a stake token or something versus the actual underlying. Let's say it's ST ETH to Ethereum. Well, it's the exact same token. So you can go sort of, let's have a look here. So ETH to WETH, for example. This one here, right? You can go tight because these are the exact same. This is the exact same sort of currency. So you can go. I wouldn't do 0.01. I would potentially go a little bit higher, but you kind of get the gist. So I like to go wide. At least 10% is sort of my personal sort of thing. I like to go at least 10%, and 10% ranges in all of these, and it's currently generating 125% APR as of recording this video, which is $500 a month on this. So that's just my thoughts, my opinions. That's what I like to do. Let me know your thinking and thoughts down below. Again, if you go really tight, you're going to be managing these positions a lot more often, and you're going to have to be rebalancing if you want to stay in sort of range for as long as possible. You're going to have to be rebalancing quite often. So that is why I do not like to do very tight ranges. Potentially, if it's a sort of, a brand new token that's just launched and I want to gamble and put some money into a meme coin LP position where I would just want to claim as many fees as possible within the space of a couple of hours, that's a different scenario. But for long-term bags and for long-term cash flow, I like to go wide, so I'm not constantly having to manage it and constantly having to rebalance. I like to let the market do its thing, and I'll talk about rebalancing and all that good stuff in another video. But for now, I like to go wide, and I like to do blue chip positions. That is pretty much my core sort of positions when it comes to LPs, is blue chips, potentially paired with a stable coin depending on what the market's doing, and sort of going long term and looking at this from a cash flow perspective. So that's going to be it for the video. If you have enjoyed, make sure you smash a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.